Ford Kuga has evolved in second generation form into a larger, more practical and more efficient proposition that'll be equally attractive to Qashqai-like Crossover and RAV4-style soft-roading SUV buyers. The single 5-seat body style is now properly family-sized and gets some clever technology that segment buyers will like. In other words, if you're shopping in this sector, here's a car you have to consider. For a company that has counted on sports utility vehicles for such a huge part of its global earnings, Ford has had a surprisingly patchy track record with the things in the UK, until 2008 and the arrival of the first generation version of this car, the Kuga. Back then, so-called crossover vehicles, models with the styling of an SUV and the sense of a family hatchback, were an emerging trend that almost every brand has since had to follow. This one copied the approach of Nissan Qashqai class alternatives, but added a butcher look and a better driving experience, a combination that saw Ford garner over 45,000 UK sales in less than 4 years, before the arrival of this Mark II model early in 2013. The priorities here weren't difficult for Ford designers to tie down. Second generation Kuga buyers wanted their cars to be more efficient, but they needed them to be bigger. The original version of this Kuga, after all, offered standards of luggage room and rear seat cabin space that were inferior to that of many compact family hatchbacks, which simply wasn't good enough in a car of this size and class. Fortunately, the solution lay in a direction that Ford was going anyway. The blue oval bean counters had already decreed that the second generation Kuga would be a global design that, badged across the Atlantic as the Ford Escape, must also satisfy the larger needs of North American buyers. In other words, it was always going to be bigger. The extra size has brought with it an extra presence and perceived purpose that, visually at least, positions this design not only as a Qashqai crossover competitor, but also as a car you might take seriously against soft-roading SUVs like, say, Toyota's RAV4 or Honda's CR-V. In other words, this Mark II Kuga should have wider appeal. It's certainly cleverer and more affordable to run. But then many other similarly targeted cars are making similar claims. Let's put this one to the test. Making a car bigger is not usually a recipe for improving its driving dynamics. Quite the reverse, in fact, which might be a cause for concern if the reason that you bought the first generation version of this car was the way that it felt almost as sharp as a Focus to drive. But loyal Kuga customers needn't fret too much. This Mark II model might not have the sheer chuckability that characterised its predecessor, but it's still a class-leading car to drive. If I had to sum up the differences with this Mark II model, I'd say that it's grown up a bit, become a bit mellower, with a personality change towards something that's a bit more family-friendly. It's like a mate that you've grown up with who's just had kids. He's still fun, just a little bit more measured in his outlook. This car still knows how to thread a series of corners together though. Yes, the chassis is a little softer in an attempt to give what is still a very firm setup an extra degree of suppleness over really poor surfaces. A change that some Kuga regulars might feel has meant the sacrifice of that extra nth of body control. But that's assuming that their experience is based on a drive in a lower order model. I'd be surprised if they were to notice such a thing in one of the plusher Kuga variants, for they come fitted with the desirable Ford Stability Control package. Now, that includes roll stability control to keep body roll in check through the corners, and Ford Curve Control. What's Curve Control? Well, it's there to act as a safeguard should you get carried away with this Kuga's dynamic prowess and enter a bend with too much speed, say on a curved slip road when exiting a motorway. In a situation like that, if you're going too quickly, Curve Control will step in and reduce automatically the vehicle's speed by around 10 miles an hour per second to get things back to a safe operating velocity. It does wonders for your peace of mind. But then this is already a car that instills driving confidence. Like many of Ford's latest models, this one gets two clever systems, both designed to get power onto the tarmac more effectively. That's torque vectoring control and enhanced dynamic cornering control. Both are things that you appreciate when turning hard through a tight bend, a time when you also note the surprisingly feelsome nature of the electric power steering system. And it's a time where you'd also notice, if you've specified it, the benefits of the intelligent all-wheel drive system that was freshly developed for this second generation Kuga. For the Mark I model, the Blue Oval's engineers used an off-the-shelf Haldex four-wheel drive system, the same as many other brands use, that most of the time would push all of the drive to the front until a lack of traction prompted a proportion of that drive to be diverted rearwards. Now, this second generation Kuga's replacement intelligent all-wheel drive system works in much the same way, but has the added benefit of an intelligent all-wheel drive information display that shows you at any given time just how much torque is being diverted to any given wheel. There's a little bar graph against each wheel. It's quite neat. Now, as with the first generation system, the whole process is completely seamless. So if you find yourself somewhere slippery and need a bit of extra traction, it's all automatically done for you. There are no fiddly knobs, buttons or levers to manipulate. The result is welcome peace of mind on the kind of wet or icy mornings that will make you glad you chose this car rather than something more conventional. It's on days like this that you might also be glad that you opted for the full-on all-wheel drive version. Though, to be fair, a two-wheel drive model fitted with a set of winter tyres might feel almost as good. Your call. What you shouldn't expect this car to be is any kind of really capable off-roader. There isn't really the ground clearance for that. But it'll be quite up to the task of tackling rutted forest tracks and muddy car parks. Quite up to the towing duties that many will assign to it too, thanks to a clever trailer sway control system and the torquey nature of the engines available. 340 newton meters of torque in the 2-litre TDCi diesels that most customers will choose. There's a choice of two, developing either 140 or 163 PS, both available with either 2 or 4-wheel drive, and either a 6-speed manual gearbox or a 6-speed power shift twin clutch automatic transmission. If you go for the manual models, then expect rest to 62 miles an hour to be dealt with in about 10.5 seconds in the 140 PS variant, on the way to a top speed of about 117 miles an hour. If you go for the higher powered diesel, you can improve those figures to 9.9 seconds and 123 miles an hour. The alternative route for British buyers is petrol power, something that was only available in the previous Kuga with a thirsty 200 PS 2.5 litre engine that almost nobody bought. That's all changed now with the availability in this Mark II model of a couple of 1.6 litre turbo EcoBoost engines, developing either 150 PS with manual transmission or 180 PS allied to a 6-speed power shift automatic. And they really do make sense if your annual mileage isn't high enough to justify the upfront price premium demanded by a diesel. Okay, so the pulling power on offer, 240 newton meters, isn't quite as great as you'd find in the diesel. But if you're not a tower, you should find the performance to be quite sufficient. Rest to 62 miles an hour, occupying 9.7 seconds in both cases. Though the Pokia unit does have a higher top speed, 124 miles an hour as opposed to 121. Whichever engine you choose, you should find refinement to be impressive thanks to double door seals and foam baffles in the B-pillars. Though this second generation Kuga shares many of the aesthetic design cues that characterised its predecessor, the headlights for example and the rising beltline, it's still very much its own car, and very much bigger too, 81mm longer than the original. There were a number of reasons why this Mark II model needed to be larger, with the need for greater cabin space being just one of them. For one thing, this car needed to serve as a replacement for the pretty large Escape SUV model that Ford offers in the States. For another, it needed to distance itself from the slightly smaller EcoSport crossover that Ford has designed to slot in just below this model in a newly rejuvenated SUV lineup, topped off by the larger, more premium Edge model. This is, in every sense, a truly global car. The chassis is built in Cologne, the powertrain in Dagenham, the upper body and interior in Detroit, and Kuga final assembly is in Valencia, Spain. All very interesting to industry analysts, no doubt, but you'll probably be wanting to know how this Kuga will serve as everyday family transport. Now, the old version wasn't much good for larger families, thanks to standards of rear seat passenger space and luggage room that were inferior to many compact family hatches. Can this one do better, despite the fact that it's still based on Focus underpinnings and shares exactly the same wheelbase as its predecessor? The answer is yes. Though the extra length isn't enough to permit the fitment of the kind of third row seating that some rivals offer, it does now enable this car on the rear seat to offer comfortable space for 2 adults, or if they're friendly, 3, the kind of thing you'll find in rivals like Toyota's RAV4, Nissan's Qashqai or Honda's CR-V. And there's plenty of headroom too, despite this car being 8mm lower than its predecessor. And you've got the benefit of seat backs that recline for greater comfort on longer journeys. Those reclining seat backs, of course, have an impact on luggage space in a luggage area that, if you're approaching heavily laden down with shopping, can be accessed via an optional power lifting tailgate that can be activated merely by waving your foot beneath the bumper. Once inside, you'll find 438 litres of space if, as they are now, the seat backs are in their fully reclined position. Now, to put that in perspective, that's about 10% more than you got in the original version of this car, and about the same amount more than you get in a rival like Toyota's RAV4. Make the seat backs more upright and you can increase the space available to 481 litres, or as much as 492 litres if you've a model with the adjustable low floor and you reposition it to its lowest setting. If you really need carriage space, of course, you can push the 60/40 split folding backrest forward with a simple tug on the seat mounted lever that sees the backrest flip and fold forward in one easy motion, revealing at least 1,615 litres of total space. That's 260 litres more than before. It's about double the amount of room you get in a comparable Nissan Qashqai. It all puts this Mark II model's growth spurt into perspective, though it's a pity that the load area floor isn't completely flat. At the wheel, the dashboard layout will be familiar to anyone who's driven one of Ford's current Focus and C-Max models. As with those designs, there's a conventional handbrake and a winged dial pack with extensive use across the fascia of bright work. It's the same on the leather-stitched 4-spoke steering wheel. An infotainment system too, though this one isn't one of those touchscreen setups. Instead, controlled via switchgear that's a bit of a reach away. Still, it all seems to be of much higher quality, and though the dash top is made of rather scratchy plastic, elsewhere there's lovely soft touch finishings. Now, since this Kuga targets both Qashqai-like crossovers and RAV4-style soft-roading SUVs, you'd expect it to be priced somewhere in between these two market segments, and that's pretty much how it turns out. The price span for the range lies somewhere between £21,000 and £30,000, with the bottom end of that spectrum buying you the entry-level 1.6T EcoBoost 150 PS petrol unit. But that only comes with manual transmission and front-wheel drive. Petrol Kuga buyers do get the option of all-wheel drive and automatic transmission, but only packaged with the 180 PS version of this EcoBoost petrol unit. And that's at a £2,700 premium that many of them just won't want to pay. Most Kuga customers, though, will want diesel power. Going for the 2-litre TDCI 140 PS unit gives you more alternatives when it comes to choosing your transmission and drivetrain layout. Prices start from around £22,000, and from here you can opt to pay another £1,500 for automatic transmission and or £1,500 to go from front to four-wheel drive. Personally, I'd suggest that a four-wheel drive 2-litre TDCI 140 PS diesel Kuga with a manual gearbox priced at around £23,500 would represent the sweet spot in the range. Going beyond this to get the Pokia 163 PS version of this diesel engine will get you a car that really doesn't go that much faster and costs quite a bit more because it can only be ordered with all-wheel drive and one of the pricier trim levels. And rivals? Well, it depends, of course, on which you have in mind, but Ford's pricing seems to stack up pretty well, whatever you're considering. Take the entry-level 1.6T EcoBoost 150 PS petrol variant. Priced at around £21,000, it'll cost you about the same as comparable soft-roading SUVs like Volkswagen's Tiguan 1.4 TSI 160 PS or Mazda's CX-5 2-litre. And it'll save you about £500 on thirstier and dirtier petrol alternatives like, say, the Honda CR-V 2-litre iVTEC, or maybe the Nissan Qashqai 2-litre 140 PS. In fact, the only comparable rival I can really think of that would save you over this entry-level Kuga would be Vauxhall's Antara 2.4 16 valve. And that goes, well, 12 miles less on every gallon. It belches out about 40% more CO2, and it will only save you about £1,000. But what about the 2-litre TDCI diesel-powered Kuga that almost every potential buyer of this Ford will want to choose? Well, again, the value proposition seems reasonable. The £22,000 asking price for the 140 PS two-wheel drive variant that I've been testing here is again pretty much the same as the equivalent Volkswagen Tiguan, in this case the Tiguan 2-litre TDI 140 PS. Yes, you could save about £1,000 by opting for an equivalent Vauxhall Antara, the Antara 2.2 CDTI two-wheel drive, but that car would cost you in tax and at the pumps. You could save potentially a bit more than that if you go for the equivalent Nissan Qashqai, the 1.6 DCI 130 PS. But bear in mind that Nissan is a slightly smaller and slightly less powerful car. Otherwise, the news is mostly good if you're looking at this particular Kuga version. An equivalent Mazda CX-5 2.2 diesel two-wheel drive will cost you about £1,000 more, and an equivalent two-wheel drive Land Rover Freelander will cost you about £2,000 more. As for the all-wheel drive 2-litre TDCI Kuga variant that I'd suggest you consider first, well, that stacks up even better. You'll pay from around £23,500 for the 140 PS version, and that's about the same as you'd pay for a comparable thirstier, dirtier and less tax-efficient Vauxhall Antara 2.2 CDTI 4x4, and it will save you about £500 on an equivalent Volkswagen Tiguan 2-litre TDI 140 PS 4Motion. Beyond that, the savings are even greater. This mainstream Kuga all-wheel drive model will save you about £1,000 on rivals like Nissan's Qashqai 1.6 DCI 130 PS 4x4, the Land Rover Freelander TD4, the Mazda CX-5 2.2 diesel all-wheel drive, or the Honda CR-V 2.2 iDTEC. it'll save you even more on an equivalent Toyota RAV4, the 2.2 D4D. It's about £3,000 more than this Ford. And even top diesel versions of this Kuga seem like they're good value. The top 163 PS 2-litre TDCi will save you about £1,500 on the equivalent Volkswagen Tiguan and Vauxhall Antara, and around nearly £5,000 on a Land Rover Freelander SD4 190 PS that goes no faster. If, having considered all this, you conclude that it is a Kuga that you really want, then you'll expect it to be well equipped, and by and large you shouldn't be disappointed. Whichever 5-door, 5-seat, 2 or 4-wheel drive, manual or automatic transmission variant you decide upon, 1.6T EcoBoost 150 or 180 PS petrol, 2-litre TDCi 140 or 163 PS diesel, whichever you go for, all are decently specified with alloy wheels, front fog lights, daytime running lights, powered heated mirrors, a quick clear windscreen, a Thatcham Category 1 alarm, a decent quality 6-speaker CD stereo system, air conditioning, cruise control and a hill start assist system to stop you from drifting backwards on uphill junctions. And beyond that, well, further up the range or on the options list, you'll find niceties like a power converter that enables you to charge up laptops or other similar devices in car, a full-length glass panorama roof, or a hands-free tailgate that lifts merely by you waving your foot beneath the rear bumper. There's also an active park assist system that helps you identify the tightest parking spaces, then automatically steers you into them. Bear in mind that you'll need one of the pricier models for the desirable Ford Stability Control package that gives you roll stability control, that makes sure that body roll is kept in check through tight corners, and also the curve control system that automatically slows the car down should you enter a corner too fast. For me, though, a must-have feature is the clever Ford Sync system with emergency assistance. Now this enables you to connect to USB drives, Bluetooth-enabled phones and MP3 players, and also allows you to receive audible text messages. But even better than that, in an accident, it will automatically call the emergency services in the language of whatever country you're travelling in and give them your exact GPS location. Talking of safety, this car is fully covered with Isofix child seat fastenings and a full tally of 7 airbags, twin front, side and curtain, plus a driver's knee bag. To hopefully ensure that you'll never have to use them, there are, of course, all the usual electronic assistance features for traction and stability control. Anti-lock brakes too, which have a brake assist function for emergency stops that will be advertised to following motorists by automatically activating hazard warning flashes. Now, other SUVs have features like these as well, of course, but no other mid-sized SUV achieved a higher occupant protection safety rating than this one in testing by Euro NCAP. To go further requires a potentially pricey trip through the options list, where you'll find a blind spot information system that stops you from dangerously pulling out to overtake in front of another driver, a lane keeping aid that stops dozy drivers from veering out of their lanes on the highway, and an active city stop system that uses a radar mounted in the top of the windscreen here to constantly scan the road ahead for potential collision hazards. If one is detected, then the driver will be alerted and the brakes will be primed. If the driver doesn't respond or isn't able to, then the brakes will be automatically applied to decrease the severity of any resulting accident. Now, you can get these 3 features as part of a desirable driver assistance pack that also includes headlamps that automatically dip themselves in the face of oncoming traffic at night, a drowsiness alert system that'll prompt you if it thinks your reactions are getting a bit drowsy and prompt you to stop for a restorative coffee, and also a speed sign camera system that pictures speed limit signs as you pass them and displays them on the dash. How spoiled we are. These days we expect our cars to be bigger and faster, with better build quality and more equipment. But at the same time, we expect to spend less on fuel and emit less carbon dioxide. Which, if you think about it, is quite a trick to pull off, but one that once again has been managed here thanks to Ford Econetic technology that includes smart regenerative charging that reclaims energy that would otherwise be lost under braking, and an active grille shutter which reduces drag and therefore improves fuel consumption. As a result of all this, the efficiency running cost figures of this second generation Kuga are far better than comparable rivals like Vauxhall's Antara, Land Rover's Freelander or Honda's CR-V, with fuel economy and CO2 improvements of up to 25% on petrol engine models and up to 10% on diesel variants. The difference between these two figures is mainly down to the fact that at the launch of this second generation Kuga, it was only the petrol engines that benefited from an auto start-stop system, able to cut the engine when you don't need it, say stuck at the lights or waiting in traffic. As a result, the entry-level front-wheel drive 1.6 EcoBoost 150 PS variant is able to achieve 42.8 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and emit 139 grams per kilometre of CO2. Figures that fall to 36.7 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and 179 grams per kilometre of CO2 if you go for the Pokia 180 PS version that has automatic transmission and all-wheel drive. As for the 2-litre TDCi diesel, well, whichever version you choose, 140 or 163 PS, you'll manage 47.9 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and put out 156 grams per kilometre of CO2. Inevitably, those figures take a bit of a dent if you opt for the 6-speed power shift automatic transmission, falling to 45.6 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and 162 grams per kilometre of CO2. The Auto only comes with all-wheel drive, but then not everybody wants all-wheel drive. And if you're one of those people and would be quite happy with the kind of two-wheel drive Kuga you can choose in TDCi 140 PS form, then you'll get a more efficient set of running cost figures, 53.3 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and 139 grams per kilometre of CO2. To help drivers get somewhere near those kinds of figures on an ordinary day-to-day basis, there's a gear shift indicator and perhaps more notably Ford's clever eco-mode driving system. It uses clever technology to continually assess your speed, your gear changing, your braking and your anticipation levels, plus the proportion of short and long trips. Smart software then gives you driving tips to improve your fuel consumption based on your unique driving style. What else? Well, there's a neat capless misfuel prevention system that stops you from putting diesel into a petrol engine or vice versa, and a set of residual value figures that are much better than you might expect from a Ford, with 3-year 36,000 mile residuals for the entry-level version hovering at around 53%. The 3-year 60,000 mile warranty that Ford gives you isn't one of the industry's most impressive, but the reliability from these powertrains has thus far been excellent. Insurance groupings range between 20 and 24. So at last, Ford has got serious about SUVs, a market category the Blue Oval soon reckons will be worth more than 10% of its global sales, if the products on offer are good enough. With this second generation Kuga, the signs are good. Like its contemporaries, it's aimed at the urban rather than the Amazon jungle, but unlike rival contenders, it can reward on twisty tarmac as well as the straight stuff, capability enhanced by some clever roll stability technology and curve technology in this Mark II model. In fact, there's so much clever stuff here. Depending on how you specify it, this car can park itself, raise its tailgate for you, brake to avoid an accident, and even automatically call for help after a crash. The most important changes, though, are fundamental ones. More frugal, cleaner power plants, a proper petrol option for the first time, and most significantly, a cabin that at last is big enough to properly serve for family duties. In other words, Ford's mid-sized global SUV has been as thoroughly thought through as you would expect it to have been. True, there's tough crossover and SUV segment competition from contenders who in the past may have seen this Kuga as a minor player in this sector. But they can't afford to make that mistake now. Ford means business when it comes to this class of car. And if you doubt that, then you need to try this one.